when at 15 he bought his first collector's vehicle, a 68 Fiat 124 coupe, and his second was a 66 330 GT 2+2, purchased by stealing your college savings. So
I had a 912 in between. My first Daytona cost under $100,000. So
well-respected Concours judge. Hilton Head Concours, Radnor Hunt, Cincinnati, and Lime Rock Vintage Festival. So
and Greenwich and all of them. I said 24.5 as a big close bid, right? Big heavy hitter. Sir George and his son interviewed. It was basically a job interview to buy a car. And they asked me questions of why I liked Bristol and what it was and what I did. And I dressed up for it because a friend of mine told me to make sure to dress properly to go to Bristol. Inline 6 3-liter BMW M54 motor sounds fantastic. I hit the wall really hard and I bent this thing better than I ever bent a race car ever. Andy wants to race one of your cars. He goes, great. He goes, get any experience? I'm like, no. He's like, you ever been in a racing school? I said, no. He's like, okay, we'll teach you. And there was like the chassis and the cab and the engine missing a fender, and there wasn't a corner on the car. There was one wheel on it, and the rear end's in the turn, in the middle of the front stretch. And I'm like, okay, I get it. BMW R1200 GS, Ducati Multistrada 1100S, 73 BMW R75/5, and I've got a 02 Triumph Bonneville. What if you had a Concours for toy cars judged by Concours judges? Bill Warner, Bill Scheffler, and McKeel were on my board of advisors. The right songs on the radio, even if we're late to where we're going in the car, you wait till the song's done. You don't turn it off. It's a crime against nature.
Jeff Stearns, connected through cars. If they're bigwigs, we'll have them on the show. And yes, we'll talk about cars and everything else. Here he is now, Jeff Stearns.
Jeff Stearns, connected through cars, with a guy I'm delighted to have on today, Andy Reid. And I know he's going to be all humble, and you're going to act like it's not a big deal to
it's not a
to
big
have
deal.
you on here from our prior conversations. But when we connected through some friends, I was like, oh my God, the show has arrived at its pinnacle.
That sounds hysterical. So
and you're like, yeah, I guess this is a bum show, like one that would have me as a.
my wife is like going, are you kidding me? Seriously?
So I'm going to just look at my notes here. So Andy Reid is a certified sports car fanatic who travels the world to see what's crossing the auction block and see what deals are going out there. This is just like, this is too good.
I didn't write it. Actually, some of that was written by my friend Scott Lear. So when I used to work for Classic Motorsports, that whole intro is his, which I thought was he made it really fun.
Andy's been involved in the collector car lifestyle since before he could drive, when at 15 he bought his first collector's vehicle, a 68 Fiat 124 coupe, and his second was a 66 330 GT 2+2, purchased by stealing your college savings. So we're going to, matter of fact, I don't think I'm going to look at all of these notes. I think I think these are
That's second and a half, really, because I had a 912 in between, but that I bought for $2,500 because that's what they cost in 1982. But
a 912 was not a desirable car. I mean, that was a 4-cylinder 911. I mean, who wanted that?
Nobody cared.
Right. So, God, and for that kind of money. Well, I mean, look, we could all talk about the cars that we could have had for nothing.
My first Daytona cost under $100,000, and I bought it in 2001. I mean, all kinds of crazy things have happened. First car book I ever bought is this book, and I bought it when I was 13, and this became my dream car. And in 2001, some things happened, and I was able to buy one. And
when you said under 100,000, my brain clicked over to Dino, because I can't even think of a sub 100,000 or 100,000-ish Daytona ever.
That wasn't 5 and 6 now. Yeah, they're crazy.
But that wasn't the money even in the era. Was
they were in 2001. You could get the funny thing is, I bought an unrestored car that was an original car, and nobody wanted an original car back in 01. And I was covering, it's hysterical. I was making about $600 to cover the Brian Redman historic races, what was called the Brick then, at Road America. And they had an auction there. And so I was covering the auction and helping to work the Classic Motorsports booth. And I covered the auction, and in the parking lot, there was a Daytona. And I said, hey, this is cool. What do you want for it? He goes, $100,000. And I had driven up my Beetle Turbo S because we worked for Grassroots Motorsports. I had one of the very first Beetle Turbo S's. I just kind of wanted one. And he goes, is that a Turbo S? I go, yeah. He goes, how many miles on it? I go, like 600. He goes, oh, wow, it's brand new. I said, I just got it. He goes, I'll trade you the Beetle Turbo S and $85,000. And I said, okay. And I gave him my Beetle and had I literally bought it the day before I went to the Kohler. The title was in the glove box. I signed the title over, did the car swap, and drove it home. And my wife's like, where's the Beetle? I said, this is the Beetle. Well, that's ugly.
And this was a Daytona coupe.
Yeah, exactly. I had a coupe and I had a chop roof as well a couple years later.
Who did them? Strauman, or who did
it? Mine was a Strauman car. Yeah.
Okay.
It was a Pilot. My second one was a pile of junk, but I kind of wanted it. And at the time, it was a good deal, though over $100,000 more than I paid for my first one. But it was years later. It was 5 years later. The thing was, my Daytona story is interesting. When I was about 13, we lived in Tucson, Arizona, in this country club neighborhood. And you had to walk to school like 2 miles from our house. And my parents were like, we're not driving you to school. You're walking. And I'm like, okay. And I'm in like 6th grade. And I'm walking down to school. And I knew I was really aware of cars already and knew what I liked. And a guy in a Daytona, in a Euro model Daytona, plexi nose Daytona coupe pulls up. And he debadged the thing, right? It was really interesting. And he had one badge, only the Cavallino Rampant was on the front of it. And I knew exactly what it was. And he goes, hey, where are you going? I said, I'm going to the bus stop. He goes, you want to ride? And I'm saying, sure. Okay, already, if you did this in 2021, there'd be 911 calls, Amber, everything, Amber alerts, right. All of it. So I said, sure. And I hopped in the car and I go, this is amazing. He goes, you know what this is? I go, yeah, this is a 365 GTB4 Ferrari Daytona. He goes, you know your cars for a kid. I go, this is my favorite car. He's like, well, where do you go to school? I go, Orange Grove. And he goes, I know where that is. You mind if I take you to school instead? And I said, no. And he made it the drive. When you're 13, you want someone that gives you a ride in a Ferrari for the first time. You want that kind of a drive. Hitting red line in first 2 gears, driving like a maniac. And it imprinted so hard. I'm like, I have to have one of these someday. And so when I had the means to do so, and this thing just showed up, and I bought it. It was just, and the 330 was a pale comparison to it. It was also an ugly, terrible brown one and crappy. But it completely delivered on what I expected it to do. So,
gosh,
yeah, they're
now
neat
you got
cars.
me thinking. Now you got me thinking. I think the last Daytona, and I know it. I mean, not today's market. I mean, not even close to today's market. And of course, yours is not close to today's market. But I remember a Tour de France blue Daytona Spider.
Great color.
That I left running a Rolls and Bentley store in 2005, and it was shortly after that this customer was referred to me wanting to get rid of a 57 Super America short wheelbase. I got to be careful.
Serious.
And this Daytona. And these clients can be interesting.
Oh, I insure them. I understand what you're saying.
So,
yes.
So at the time, but I mean, the money sounds so cheap now because the Super America short wheelbase, he wanted $1.2 million.
Add a zero.
Right. And we found, well, I hope he hung on to it. We were upset as the one selling it for him, but we found him and it wasn't overnight. And the reason he was giving it to us surgically, because we'd suggested, an auction at Pebble Beach or something for a car like that at the time.
What year was this?
05-ish.
Yep.
Okay. So probably 05. So he says, I don't want anyone to know that I'm selling it because he has all these friends that if he's going to sell it would want it, and who's he going to hurt and all that business.
Yes.
So it was like a surgical secret sale, and we get a deposit out of Belgium, like $100,000 against the money. 'Cause it was like, it was a weird sale because it's like we had to sell it, but we couldn't tell anyone. Like nobody could know. So
Yeah,
do you want it? Yes, no.
Like
and you can't, if you don't want it, you can't tell anyone. You know? So we get the deposit and he backs out of that sale. So good. I mean, I hope he has it now, but, anyway, we were a little upset as the one in the middle selling it. Right.
Yep.
And then the other car was this, Tour de France Blue Daytona Spider that we'd gotten $575 for. Again, right?
Yeah, $2.5 million car, and TDF Blue probably $2.5 million these days, maybe more.
So the hitch in this deal, after you already backed out on us on the 57, was that we'd sent the car, the buyer sent the money, and he didn't have a title. So we said, hey, we got to give this guy his title. And he says, well, I'm starting a foundation, and the car is owned by the foundation, and I didn't finish the paperwork on making the foundation, and the foundation owns it. Just get the car back. I think the guy had the car, right? And he paid us. We're just like waiting for the title. So long story endless, my partner at the time flew to the state that the foundation was being formed in, and however he did it, hand carried the paperwork through and made the foundation into a foundation and then got a title and flew back. So that's my trauma when I hear about a Daytona.
Yeah, antics in the car business never end. It's astounding. It's never ending.
It's astounding and never ending. So I think my brain was in this 05 era. That's where I was. And when you said $100,000 Daytona, I was thinking of a Dino.
Yeah, because that was, I had a Dino, I had a yellow Dino for a minute too. And I think I paid a coupe, 246 GT coupe, no flares, no chairs, because I don't fit in flares, chairs, cars, because the seats are jacked up. And I'm 6'4". But 38, and it was kind of a driver, but it was astounding, and it was a beautiful thing. And I think it was $38,000. This is probably 02, 03. That's what they cost, and then they went nuts. And at the time, I knew, I'm like, these are underpriced, and they were head to head with 911, with early 911Ss, short nose 911 or long nose 911S.
So was that like Mondial money?
Pretty much, yeah. And it was scruffy, And the thing it was wonderful is that it was vinyl seats, like they all had, like they pretty much every one of them had, unless people ordered them special, and very few did. And it was older repaint. It was just a driver. It was just kind of a scruffy car. But I'm like, but it's a Dino, and mechanically it was pretty well sorted. And I'm like, yeah, you just buy this at under $40,000, and it was a fun car.
I mean, but it's one of the most gorgeous cars ever, in my opinion.
Oh, I think it's the prettiest. And it's a bold statement. I think it's maybe it's definitely the prettiest mid-engine car the company ever built as a production car. But it's maybe one of the top 5 most beautiful Ferraris ever drawn, I think. I mean, it's just a masterpiece. So,
I mean, we're going to get into all this. Your background's amazing, and I just want to put it out there. So, you're a Concord judge.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, when we're making this recording, we're not even a week out from Amelia Island starting, which you will not be attending.
Because on a double whammy, I drove a car this past week to go to Carlisle that the seats were not ideal for someone my size, and I adjusted them stupid, and I have sciatica. So I am not walking around Amelia with sciatica. So I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not. I'm just not doing that. So
I'm sorry about your sciatica.
It pains. But I never had anything like this. It's like, oh my God, this is excruciating pain. So sorry, Bill. That's why I'm not there. I can barely walk. So,
okay. So to Bill Warner, we can say that this is not a boycott.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. I just can't walk, Bill. It's great. Physical therapy at 6 o'clock. Yay.
Not funny about sciatica, but I did grow up in a Jewish neighborhood in Detroit, so I can't help thinking about.
I got the sciatica. Right? Yeah.
First thing that comes to mind. I'm glad you didn't say shingles. Okay.
No, I grew up in West Bloomfield, so I totally understand it. Yeah, same neighborhood, probably different place. So.
Okay, so here we are, folks. This is not an interview. This is a recorded conversation. So as this unfolds organically, my dad's lot was at Main and Crooks, where Rochester Road comes out in Royal Oak.
That's funny.
I grew up at 10 and a half in Greenfield in my dad's high rise next to Northland Shopping Center, Americana movie theater.
Know exactly where that stuff is.
And all the relatives were West Bloomfield, Farmington Hills, and now, but the sciatica thing was more in my grandma's building, Lincoln Towers. But now the relatives are Commerce Township, Cass Lake, etc. White Lake.
Yeah, my grandma, my dad's mom, was in Indian Village. So when it was still a really nice neighborhood, before it was not a nice neighborhood, and now it's going to be a nice neighborhood again. Everything transitions. Right.
And if you're not from the area, this is not like a wigwam exhibit kind of thing.
No.
So you grew up in West Bloomfield.
Until I was 11, yeah.
Also until I was 11. Okay. So, all right, imagine that. So God knows if we dug who we'd know and who our relatives would know. And
Kensington Academy, and before that, Detroit Country Day. So, yeah, that's what I did. So,
all right, that's very interesting. That's so funny. So I bring up the sciatica, and we both were thinking West Bloomfield.
Yeah.
Or Miami in the winter, or Lauderdale Lakes in the winter.
Exactly.
Okay, that's fabulous. So where you've been now, thank goodness someone else wrote this note, unless you wrote the note, because it has well-respected before it. So did you add in that well-respected?
No, somebody else did that. I would never do that. It's like I got business cards for insurance, and my boss put on it Collector Auto Guru. And I didn't realize that he did it. I just got new business cards, and I was handing them out. And a couple, 3 years ago at Amelia, or to somebody, was like, "Oh, Collector Auto Guru." And I went, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Look at your card." I'm like, that jerk. He didn't even tell me. And to my detriment, I didn't proof it either. So, but he thought that was really funny. But no, I would not add those kinds of titles. Somebody else wrote that. I think Hilton Head wrote that. So
well-respected Concours judge, Hilton Head Concours, Radnor Hunt, Cincinnati, and Lime Rock Vintage Festival. So
and Greenwich, and all of them. I mean, Chattanooga. Give a shout out to Chattanooga, best first-year Concours I've ever been to, and it's going this year. Yeah, and they're added a vintage race this year, which is going to be really cool.
I'll be at Radnor Hunt, September, right?
Nice. Yep.
You'll be there?
Judging motorcycles. Yep.
There or somewhere, we'll shake hands. But
exactly.
There we'll meet. So tell us a little bit about the insurance business. Let's plug a little.
Well, it's funny. So I worked for Classic Motorsports for like 12 years as the auction editor, and I got fired over a number of things. And Tim and I are friends. We hung out this weekend at Carlisle. So Tim Sutter and I are pals. In fact, I just interviewed him for a story I wrote 2 weeks ago. But I didn't know what I was going to do. I was underemployed. My wife was on my back, and she had mentioned I should think about collector car insurance. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Why do I want to do that? And Brad Phillips from Haggerty said, why don't you sell collector car insurance? And I said, well, I don't know. He's like, well, you can't work for us directly because you have all this other stuff that you probably don't want to let go of. I said, no, I like this writing thing and this. He's like, that's going to be hard to do at Haggerty, but why don't you get an insurance license and figure this out? And he and my friend Matt Orendeck, who still works for Haggerty, they both do, but who now runs Greenwich Concours, they were my study buddies for my insurance test. McKeel I called him up because I got stuck on something. I couldn't get them. And it didn't occur to me, because it never does, to not call the CEO of the company with an insurance test question. I was like, so I called him up and said, so what does this mean? And so McKeel, Brad, and Matthew, who are all really senior, were my study buddies for my insurance test, because I didn't know diddly squat about the insurance industry when I got the test. So I got the thing. I got my license, and I'm like, what am I going to do now? And Brad's like, well, you should interview at places. And so I interviewed at one company, and it was cubes. And I hadn't worked in cubes since my early AOL days, and I don't like cubes. It's just no fun. I just hate it. And I interviewed at another place. These guys wanted to hire me right away. And I'm like, I call Brad, and he goes, yeah, you don't want to work with those guys because they don't know what they're doing. And he goes, you should call this guy named Morgan Duffy, who runs this company called Hayden Wood Insurance. He's a brokerage who specializes in collector cars. And so I got the Chubb guys calling me back. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm deciding. And I went into, and it was this long pressure interview on the first one. The second one, hey, we'll hire you. I'm like, what? Okay. So I went into Morgan's office and I said, hi, I'm here to see Morgan Duffy. He goes, that's me. He goes, I'm supposed to hire you. Everyone has told me to hire you. I said, okay. He goes, do you like Mexican food? And I said, I love Mexican food. He goes, you're hired. Let's go eat some Mexican food. And that's how I got involved in insurance. And he trained me then after he showed me, here's how this works, and here's what you need to do, and here's how these forms work. But it was an interesting addition because it kind of it was like a piece of the puzzle that was missing, as it were. And so it let me take the different things and smush them together. Because automotive journalism does not pay the bills.
No, it just looks so sexy and glamorous.
Not unless you're like Pete Egan or somebody.
Got it. So you know Clint Sly, I'm sure.
For years and years, we have accidentally gone on vacation in Hawaii with he and his wife twice. We're just there at the same time, and we end up getting dinners and stuff. Wonderful guy.
Twice in Hawaii, coincidentally?
2 different times, yes. 2 different times. I think on 2 different islands even. Which is interesting. Yeah, Clint and I have been friends for 15 years since he was at Haggerty. So, and since he's left. So,
I think I've also known Clint since probably 15, 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, do you remember his condo development stint?
Yeah.
Okay, we met in the middle of all that business.
Yeah, he tried to get me in charge of the motorcycle division at Haggerty because I was one of the few guys that understood classic bikes at the time, and the timing wasn't right. And I didn't know, I wasn't licensed yet either. It was more of a marketing scheme role, and I wasn't involved in the industry like I am now. And they're like, yeah, no, we don't want you. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Clint, you're obsessed about your shoes. You know, he's got these Gucci shoes. He's got like 26,000 pairs, and he resoles them and soles them special, and he's just completely crazy about these shoes. And it's like, that's the only goofy thing about Clint. It's not goofy, it's just like, he is just obsessively perfectionistic about these shoes. And you've seen him. It's the Gucci shoes he wears all the time.
So, British cars, Bentley Brooklands, and just stop me when there's a story or something to talk about with one of these cars.
Well, Brooklands is funny. We were living in Dublin, California, and I don't even know what the hell car I had besides that at that point. I had something else. I might have had a 328, but I can't remember. I was short cash, but I had this Brooklands. I saw a list on Craigslist. Bentley Brooklands, 26,000 miles, 2 owners, British Racing Green. It was like 23.5, and 1993. And I went, that's interesting. And it was a mile and a half from our house. I'm like, who the heck's got this? I know where I live. I haven't seen this floating around. And there were no pictures. And I'm like, it's so close. It could have been a scam, could have not. So I cruised over to the guy's house. I rode my Norton Commando over. And I'm like, look at this. And he goes, wow, yeah, this is that. And I'm like, well, this is definitely what you said it was. And I drove it, and it was actually a 94, which is a better car with better fuel injection. And it was as immaculate as represented. It was a bespoke special order. BRG with spruce leather. And the Bentley Rexine, how they put on the bodies. The headliner was in Bentley Rexine special order. It was all this crazy nonsense. And it was stickered out like 322 when they were done. With every added crazy thing you could have. And my wife was out of town for a couple of days. I'm like, crap, I can't pull 23 grand out of our accounts, and I need to do this. I said, can you wait, Mark, a couple of days? Because sure, no sweat. So I had this Rolex GMT Master that I'd bought about 6 years before, a solid gold one. And I had something else, a Ferrari book, signed Enzo Ferrari book. And a friend of mine wanted the book, and another friend of mine wanted the GMT, and it added up to $20,000, the two things. And I sold the watch and sold the thing. I said, I had 5 or 6 grand sitting around, so I got the rest of the money in the bank and bought this thing and drove it home. And my friend Gary drove me over there in his Corvette. I buy the thing and drove it home. Ann shows up. She goes, what's with the green car? I said, oh, that's our car. And she's like, you bought, and my wife's very conservative. She's like, she doesn't like to be showy and stuff. So she goes, why did you buy this? I go, because it's a Bentley. And she goes, how did you afford this? I said, I sold the watch and a book. And she's like, you did what? You go, yeah, I sold the gold Rolex and a book. She goes, didn't you like the Rolex? I'm like, not as much as this. And so she goes, I think this is a stupid car. I went, okay. And then I said, hey, we're going to a Rolls-Royce Club thing on Saturday. You want to go? She's like, what is it? It's a picnic. She goes, oh, I can bake. So she baked a bunch of stuff because she's a serious baker. And she got in the Bentley for the first time with the lamb's wool over mats and shuts the door. And she goes, oh my God. I go, yeah. She goes, this is amazing. I said, yeah, this is a Bentley. She goes, what did this cost new? And I said, $300,000 plus. She goes, what did you pay for this thing? I said, $23,500. She goes, this is the nicest car we've ever owned. And I said, yes, it is. And she had a great time. We loved the car. We put 25,000 miles on it in 18 months, which is a lot of miles on one of those. And it never failed. Never had any issues. And the funniest thing was, about 6 months later, Mercedes is introducing the new S-Class. And so I flew in, it was at Palm Springs, and I drove down to SFO and flew out of SFO and did the press launch. On the way back, the PR people from Mercedes at the time, they flew back to San Francisco because they were doing something there, and they said, hey, do you have a car here? I said, you want to give us a ride to our hotel? And I said, sure. So we jump in the Bentley, and they get in, and their one PR person who's British goes, oh goodness. And I said, what? She goes, the shame of everything is that we simply can't afford to build a car this nice at Mercedes-Benz. You can't make a mass-produced thing this nice. This is extraordinary. And I'm like, I agree with you. They're just very special things. If you get a really good one, they're amazing. They're like driving around a British gentleman's club, not a traditional, like a proper gentleman's dinner club with gambling and things. It's just, they're magnificent things.
I'm totally curious to hear about the option list because you said it was a bespoke car and
picnic tables, umbrellas, decanters, security system, firearm hiding place for underneath the passenger seat. There was a compartment, hidden radar detectors front and rear, hidden radar jammer installed from the factory.
Okay. I'd not seen that. Okay.
All kinds of weird stuff. Higher spec engine performance. The interior panel, the interiors, it was basically made to order. You couldn't order it with this color combo and the materials, so they just built one. It's a one-of.
And spruce is green leather.
Yeah, dark green leather. It's the same exact green leather that was matched to a 1929 Bentley WO 3-liter car. And they literally had it. He made that car to match his old one, and it was exactly the same color scheme. Hence the wreck scene on the roof, on the headliner, because that matched it too. And it was just this nuts car. And I thought, wow, this is a lot of green. And I got into it, and I'm like, yeah, this is really nice. And it really worked.
Standard wheelbase.
Standard wheelbase.
Did it have the like small back window or anything?
No. Big back window. Yeah, it was a lot of weird stuff.
And you didn't get murdered on the maintenance?
No, I didn't. I think it cost about $1,500 a year, which is like any car.
That's free on a Bentley. Free.
It's free on a Bentley, and it's like no more than a BMW, Porsche, Mercedes, Kia, if you take care of it properly. I mean, it was just minor stuff, nothing ever went wrong.
Fabulous. Okay.
It came with service records like a phone book, right? So
the story, other than how beautiful it was, and the comment from Mercedes staff, I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, who will not be named because they'll get in trouble.
Right, I understand. They need to remain anonymous. Of course, this could be the scoop that could get my podcast, known, but we're not going to name this person. Even if it ruins,
people can back into it and figure it out. I mean, if they would want to, they go, "Who was in PR when they launched the S-Class around the mid 2000s?" And it'll all make sense.
So, speaking of resale issues, I see also a DBS and a DB7 in your past.
Oh, the DBS is the saddest thing. The DBS was a car I bought. Have you been out to Barrett-Jackson for Arizona before, right?
Yes.
So you remember in the olden days, in the early 2000s, when you'd show up on Sunday morning, and there was
That's
nobody.
Actually the era that I was going was 2000 to 05-ish.
Yeah, and there was nobody there on Sunday morning, but they were selling cars, and the room was empty because they were all drunk because they started the thing at 9 a.m., and everybody was drunk from the night before. So I'm sitting there in, I think, 2002.
Let's explain this to the audience. So, Andy, we don't know that everyone has this experience.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So what Andy's talking about is cars running through an auction, and if you don't have a lot of people there competing to buy, once in a while a car could maybe be bought right because you're not competing against a room full of bidders.
And it never happens anymore. It's sad. So I'm there for media, but I've got a bidder's pass, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, taking a picture here and there. It's 02 or 03. I guess 03. And this DBS in silver birch with black leather rolls up there, left-hand drive, 5-speed AC car. And I'm like, so you walk up to the block because that was very easy to do back then. And there's nobody in the room. So I'm walking up, I'm like, and they go, "Do we have 20,000? Do we have 20,000? I'm like, yeah, you do. And so I gave him my 20,000 bid, and there was somebody bid 21, and I bid 21.5, and he bid 22, and I said 24.5 as a big close bid, right? Big heavy hitter, and ended up with the freaking car. And I'm like, wow. And the thing is, they were probably worth about 35 then because they hadn't gone crazy yet. And it was an injected cars and all this stuff, which is a good and a bad thing. And I got a DBS, and I had it for a couple years. And we were living in Arizona at the time, and I was moving to Richmond, Virginia with my wife. And I guess it's like 02, I guess. So, and I'm like, it's going to Virginia. It's going to get all screwed up because of the weather, because it snows there, and this wasn't going to be a snow thing. And I talked to a friend of mine, my friend Don Rose, who used to be a specialist at RM, and he's an Aston guru. And I said, so you think the DBS is ever going to be worth anything? This is like 2 years later. It's a James Bond car. It's like, yeah, but it's a James Bond nobody cares about. And it's kind of, they're kind of 35 or 40. And that's kind of what they're probably going to be forever. I'm like, well, I've had this for a while. And my wife calls it this Camaro, which always made me unhappy. And so I sold it to a guy for 40 grand. And my exact VIN a couple years ago sold for 167. So, yeah. Now, I didn't lose money on the car. It was a great car. It's the only car I've owned I want back. But I can't if I say, hey, honey, we're going to go buy this, she's be like, no, we're not.
I was thinking about BMW puts a little tube into the cabin of the car from the engine compartment.
Yep. My Z4's got one.
Yes. And it's great how it gives you the visceral experience.
And it's not like, it's a Toyota with Lexus where they actually use a fake sound through the stereo or something? I think that's for electric, right? Or for hybrid? No, I think it's for standard too. I didn't know that. Okay. No, I know it's for the LC500H, which is the hybrid. So it's probably just the hybrid. because Lexus spent a lot of money, a lot of time and money on their exhaust sounds for the natural aspect. I know the hybrid has a piped-in sound in Sport Plus, but I think the tube is great. It lets you hear stuff. So
Yeah, it's fabulous in the Z4.
And it's analog.
Right. Imagine that. One thing that won't break. One thing that doesn't need a chip.
Exactly. And, I did a similar thing. I've got a 2002 Triumph Bonneville, and it's got a snorkel in the airbox. And it doesn't really do anything. It just brutes sound. It's a noise regulation EU thing. And so if you pull it off, you can hear the carburetors working. You can hear the induction sound. And I'm like, that's got to be nonsense. And so my friend Jimmy, who's like Mr. Motorcycle expert and my guru for all things motorcycles, he goes, pull that thing off and tell me what you think. And I went, wow, it even sounds better. He's like, yep. And it's actually a little snappier because it's a little less restrictive. So it's the same kind of a thing. It just reduces something between you. So.
And do you now have a 401? Do you have a Bristol 401?
401. Yes. Left-hand drive.
Okay.
Which is hard to find.
That's very, very interesting car.
Yeah.
Any story behind that?
Well, I had a 408. I bought it from Toli Aruntov, who's a famous classic car guy and racing guy and the whole thing, raced at Daytona and Targa Florio and stuff. We've known each other for 15 years or so. And I like things that people don't, I love to have cars that people don't necessarily know what they are sometimes, right? And a Bristol was a very interesting thing. So, in the process of buying a Bristol, I got to meet Tony Crook from Bristol and Sir George White and all that when I was on the trip to London, and I really learned about the company. And it was before I bought my Bristol privately. And I said, I'm really interested in buying a Bristol. And they basically Sir George and his son, it was basically a job interview to buy a car. And they asked me questions of why I like Bristol and what it was and what I did. And I dressed up for it because a friend of mine told me to make sure to dress properly to go to Bristol. And I did.
That was no problem for you. You were like, yes.
Yeah, I'm like,
dressing.
Great, perfect. Opportunity to buy some clothes. And so I went over, they sent me over to Tony Crook's office, which was he didn't even own Bristol anymore. And so I talked to Tony for a while. He asked me the similar questions. And he goes, Sir George, and then I'll see you back at the dealership. And thank you very much. And so he sent me, I've got an autographed picture of him that he gave me when he was him racing that I've still got on the wall over here, which is kind of fun. And he died like 6 months later. So I went back to there and they go, well, Mr. Reid, Tony Crook and we and Tony think that you'd be a proper person to own a Bristol. And I wasn't buying a car from them. I'm like, okay. So I went back to Toli, and Toli said that the powers that be at Bristol had told him it was okay for him to sell me the car, because Toli ordered 3 or 4 Bristols from Bristol direct in the day. So he was connected. And so I bought it from him. And it was okay, but I didn't really love it. It was a right-hand drive car, and they're really big. They're a good-sized car. A 408's it's a full 4-seater 2-door that giant people can sit in the back seats of. And it was a little scruffy, so I sold it to my friend Robin Kirk, and then I kind of missed it and wanted another one, but I really wanted a classic one, like a true Bristol with a Bristol engine. And a client of mine bought this car, and it's now my car. We're still working out the details, but he's fundamentally aware that it's my 401. And it was at an RM auction a couple years ago, and it sold for very light money. I think it was in Argentina or someplace weird. And it was too under the money. And I made the deal with my client. I said, here's the thing. This is my car. We got like 8 cars out of the I helped him get 8 cars out of the sale. I said, you keep this as long as you want it, but I'm paying, this is our deal. I'm not getting paid for helping. You are selling me this car for what we have in it when you're done with it. He goes, well, it's your car. And I said, great. So, and I get to drive it anytime I want to because it's in Maine, so it's easy to get to. But it's my last serious classic car I want to spend money on because I just don't need anything else anymore. So I've done a lot of stuff.
Sounds like it. The sexy life of Andy Reid.
It's just been fun. I've played with so much stuff, and oftentimes I'll get someone else's car to drive on this or whatever else, and race this or whatever else. And I've owned so many right now. And I was talking to a friend of mine. I was thinking about another TVR this week, and his comment was, your Z4 that's immaculate does everything that car does better. And I went, you're right. So it's interesting that a car like that has kind of ruined me for the classic car hobby to a certain degree. But I had a Z3, I had a James Bond edition Z3 that I had for about 6 or 7 years. Another friend of mine bought, who was never going to sell it. He's a James Bond fanatic. I am kind of too, but he is even more than me. But the Z4, it was kind of, my wife found it in our neighborhood, and I said, okay, this is pretty cool. And I'd not driven one since their launch in 2003, so I hadn't been in one. And the one I had was a 2.5, the press car I got for that launch was the 2.5 liter automatic, like the one you don't want. And this is a 3 liter 6 with a sport package. And I was test driving, and I called Tom Plazinski from BMW, and I said, is this as good as it seems it is? He goes, what are you driving? I said, this is C4. And he goes, give me the VIN. He goes, da da da. And he runs the VIN. He's like, oh yeah, that's a really nice spec car. I had one of those as a corporate car. You're going to love that thing. And he has not been wrong. It does enough vintage and does enough modern to be kind of a perfect package. And it's the engine that, inline 6 3 liter BMW M54 motor sounds fantastic. So, it's kind of, BMW broke my classic car thing to a certain degree.
Well, that's because you got a little intellectual about it.
Yep. Well, the Bristol's kind of a BMW, right? Because it's got a BMW, 328 motor from pre-war in it, basically. So the grill is the same.
I'm looking now. Yes, we'll put pictures up. We'll put some pictures up while we're talking about this. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the kidney.
Yeah, and it's a BMW derived. They stole the tooling from BMW for the 328 motor. The British did. They said this is ours now, and that's what that motor is. And that's why they're so damned expensive. Is because if you have a 328, you're vintage racing or vintage rallying, you can't buy a block. So people were robbing 6-cylinder Bristols for that stuff a lot. So, or Arnold Bristol guys, or anybody racing a Bristol engine thing, they've robbed the road cars. So,
speaking of James Bond, are you a James Bond movie nut or a James Bond car in movie nut?
Yes. Cars, books, movies. I'll turn my little thing here. Those books over there on the top shelf. Is it top shelf? Second shelf, which is blocked. The two shelves there. There's a couple mixture ones in there, but there's a signed Ian Fleming book. There's a signed John Gardner book. I have a issue with James Bond. I've got James Bond Omega Seamaster 40th anniversary watch. I've got a James Bond Turnbull and Asser suit that I had made that's exactly like one of his shirts, shoes, a pea coat that Daniel Craig was I can't remember the company that makes it, but Daniel Craig wore the same exact pea coat in Skyfall, and I own that. Yeah, my wife would say it's a serious problem.
Okay, that's real. And when you get the same suit, are you getting the same fit?
No, I'm not as thin as Craig is. But mine's actually a Connery suit, but I'm still probably not as thin as Sean Connery was then, though. But it's same exact.
Well, like that tight Beatles suit look.
No, it's more of a proper British cut suit.
Traditional.
But it's the same material, same lapels, same button combinations, same straight fit pants, same non-cuffs. Yeah, we went nuts because they made the suits for them originally, and so they have it all there, and they can just cut it to match. So
you're not the first person who asked for one.
Oh no.
So racing. You mentioned vintage racing, but you've raced professionally, right?
Yeah, I raced in a couple NASCAR series.
Pretty serious.
Yeah, it was very serious. We actually moved to we were living in California. I was doing California NASCAR series, and we moved to my wife. Well, I got a job at a startup from some friends. My first startup I was involved in, first successful startup I was involved in, that moved me to Virginia. And Ann's like, well, you can race there better because it's more in the home of things. And so I picked up and moved to Virginia with my wife, to DC area. And I ran the Goodies Dash series there because, and I knew from running the West and the Tour and those things that I was never going to be a Cup driver or probably even a Busch driver. And I wanted to run Daytona and Bristol. And the only way to run Daytona and Bristol on an oval is either ARCA, and I could care less about ARCA. You can't get sponsors for it, or you couldn't then. You need Darnwell. I'm sure you can't now. Or the Goodies Dash series. And so the problem is I'm 6'4" and they're tiny cars. And so I got a hold of Michael Waltrip through some friends who is 6'4". And I said, so it's Andy Reid. You don't know me, but I'm friends with Schrader and those guys. And I trying to find out who built your Goodies Dash car. He goes, Charlie Weaver. And you call him up. And so I called Charlie Weaver up. And he's like, well, do you have any money? And I said, yeah, but I've also got a sponsorship deal with TRD. And so, and he'd worked with TRD before, but so we went Goodies Dash Racing. So, and it was my final series. And it was fun. I don't regret it. I'd never do it again. It ate so much money. It was unfathomable. And so much time. And I would never want to do it now because it's not nearly as fun. It's so much work.
Did you ever get scared?
Nah. Well, that's not true. In my last year, I was running this, I can't remember what car it was, but I was running it at like a little local racetrack just for some track time and just messing around. And I lost concentration and just in practice, right? And my wife was wanting us to go on this trip, and I was squeezing this race in, and it was like 4th of July weekend. It was like a Friday before the Saturday 4th. And so I was running this race, and my crew was down there and blowing around. And I lost concentration in practice going pretty good at this Manassas racetrack, which no longer exists, I don't think, but it was one of the old 1940s racetracks, been around forever. Terrible track, horrible lighting. And I hit the wall really hard, and I bent this thing better than I ever bent a race car ever. I was like, and I got out of the car all pissed off, and I looked at the car and holy crap, and I was in my last year, and I'm like, wow, this is dangerous. And it never really occurred to me then that it was dangerous. A friend of mine calls it, a racing friend of mine says race car drivers have one thing in common, that's a lack of imagination about what could happen. And I gained my and I have a good imagination about like writing things, but I really truly was that guy with like, oh, nothing will happen. And I was wrecked by somebody else in my first race in a NASCAR stock car, and just got in and won the next week. We built the car. So again, lack of imagination. And that thing was totaled. I flipped that car 13 times, got out of the car pissed off, and wanted to punch him in the head. But then I told the guy, we're building this car and putting it back on the track next week, and we're kicking his butt. And we did, which was great in my first 2 races ever. But after that wreck, we were running a Legends car of all things too, which is a terrible race car. Sorry guys. Sorry Humpy Wheeler. The Legends car was a bad idea, or a good idea poorly executed. And I'm like, wow, I can kill myself doing this. And Dale had died that year. I had seen that. And I'm like, it started to become really clear to me that I was in my 30s and getting older and not getting younger, and that everybody I was racing it with was 21 years old, it seemed like. A lot of the newer guys, the older guys were getting out. And I bailed. I said, I'm out of here. And at the end of the season, I failed to renew. I had a contract renewal. I said, I'm going to step away from this, and thank you very much. And
I had Derek Bell on, one of my first shows, and talking to him about this. And I asked him what I asked you. Do you get scared? Because to me, I mean, it's serious.
It's really serious
when you're out there. But talking to Derek Bell, I mean, in his early days, X amount of people died every week or, every race. And I just couldn't imagine. And he's like, look, I'm not a daredevil. I won't jump out of an airplane. I'm not, it's not like that. It's just like you worded it well, or the person that worded it for you about lack of imagination. I think you just can't think about that. And I think maybe the line in the sand moves a little bit at a time. I mean, because you didn't go from zero to professional race car driver. You had some stuff in the middle. They got you very comfortable.
Oh no.
Oh no. Okay.
So, I told this story about 4 years ago. I was sitting on a table with Tommy Kendall. I'm not just name dropping. I'm just framing this with TK and Hobbs and Bill Oberlin, Moss, like the veritable legends, and Schlub's there, and Schlub being me. And we're talking there about racing, blah, blah, blah. And so TK, who knows me pretty well, I know all those guys. I knew Sterling pretty well, but it's those, being a journalist, I've got to be pals with those guys. Hobbs and I have gotten, over COVID, got really thick. We're pals. It's nice. And same with TK, I've known each other for years. People always introduce us and like, have we met? It's our funny little gag. So I'm sitting there and Hobbs goes, not Hobbs, but TK goes, you race stock cars. Why did you race stock cars? And Hobbs in perfect, what in the bloody hell would you race those terrible things for? And I said, well, here's what I thought. I thought American V8, at the time, initially, bias ply tires, a carburetor, that it would be the cheapest way to go racing. And Bill Oberlin looked at me and just busted out laughing. And so TK goes, and what did you find out? I said, I found out I was wrong. He goes, how long did it take? I said, 5 years. He goes, why didn't you know? I said, well, you guys use a motor race. And I said, yeah, we sure do. But I assumed that when you ran a Porsche Cup car that you replaced the race motor every race either. And they use them all year. And it never occurred to me to do anything else. And so what I did, I was working at an ad agency in Palo Alto. And I'm like, I'm going to go racing. And my friend's like, okay. And I had money to do it. So I went up there with a checkbook. And I went to the track, which is Altamont Raceway Park. And I go, I want to go racing. And he said, that's great. What do I do? He's like, fill out this form. So I fill out this form. He goes, you need to get a medical. I said, I got it. The websites are happening. So I go, here's my medical from my doctor. He goes, great. Get a picture right there. Perfect. What level do you want to race at? I go, I don't know. He's like, you want to be Challenge Charger, or do you want to be Grand American Modified, or what else? I said, well, I don't know, because I think I'm going to do some higher level stuff here. He's like, well, then you should probably get a Southwest Tour or a truck license. California Super Trucks is what they were called then. And I said, okay, sign me up for a Southwest Tour license. And so I got a Southwest Tour license. No, I got a truck license. And so I said, okay, so what's the deal? What do I do next? He goes, well, you need a car. I said, okay, well, what do I do that? He's like, well, there's a guy here that rents them for races. It's an arrive and drive program. I'm like, arrive and drive? What is that? And they go, well, they roll off the cars. They get you ready to go. You have to have safety gear. You show up and you race the car. I said, what's that cost? They told me. I said, okay. So we'll introduce you. He's down there testing. I said, great. So I went down there and I met a guy that goes, Greg, this is Andy. Andy, it's Greg. Andy wants to race one of your cars. And he goes, great. He goes, getting experience? I'm like, no. He's like, you ever been in a racing school? I said, no. He's like, okay, we'll teach you. And so I got in the race car the next weekend. I got safety gear from a company in Wine Country Motorsports at Sears Point. And I didn't get Simpson like all the NASCAR guys. Here's the funny thing. I'm a Formula One and endurance racing fan going NASCAR racing. So I get an Arai helmet, a Sparco suit, Sparco gloves. And my outfit, I'm like the only guy wearing the Formula One crap, but I knew it was the safest stuff. And people are like, wow, you spent $1,000 on a helmet. I'm like, yep, I sure did. You know, you can get a bell for $300. Yes, I do. But I was just like, I was copying Schumacher, but I figured if Schumacher wore that stuff, then that's probably the best stuff in the world to buy. And it's the safest. So I bought all his stuff. And I showed up there and went racing and was terrible. And he's like, you're just terrible at this. I said, I know. So we did about 100 laps at this half-mile oval.
You're just terrible, I know.
I didn't know what I was doing, and so I got better and better as the day went on. I wasn't just terrible. I probably did 100, 150 laps at a half-mile track. So I did all this. He's like, okay, there's our first races next week on Friday. And I went, okay. So I show up there, and this is California Super Trucks is like this exhibition series at this point. It's not Craftsman Truck Series. It's not points. It's just this thing. But it's basically a 9-to-1 Winston Cup chassis, 9-to-1 358 cubic inch Winston Cup chassis. Run this Ford, and I'm racing the race, and I'm not in the back, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like blocking everybody. I'm driving like an idiot because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the rules are, except what I've learned in 100 and some laps at the practice. And somebody comes into me, a guy named Dave. Coming out of turn 4, I was finally opening up the wheel for the first time to push the race car out, which was the hardest thing to darn well learn. And I just felt like you'd hit the wall. And I finally let the car free up, and I went, whoo. And I was just, unloading it to slide up to the wall. And this guy named Dave made an error and caught me in the left rear quarter with his right front, flipped me on my roof, and sent me down the front stretch wall. And I remember thinking to myself, and I'd read a lot of books about stock car racing. And what I read about, I didn't read like how to do it books. I read like Richard Petty's biography and Dale and everybody, Cale Yarborough's biography. And there's a lot of tips in those. And I remember reading in Petty's biography that when you're upside down in a race car, take it out of gear and hammer the gas against the limiter to keep it from starving fuel and stalling. So if you end up on your wheels again, the car's still running. So I did that. And at the time I'm thinking, wow, this looks just like ESPN because I'm upside down, right? I'm like, this looks just like it does with the in-car camera. And I came off the wall and tumbled about 8 times. No, actually more than that. Like I think it was like 13 times down the front stretch. And the car's still running. And the red flags are out. And guys run over, get out of the car. I said, no, leave me alone. Drop a yellow flag. I'm driving this car. It's fine. And he said, no, you don't understand. I said, no, shut up. I'm driving this car. I saved it's still running. I don't want to shut it off. They go, here's the deal. Leave it running. Get out of the car. And when you look at the car, then tell us if you're going to go racing. I went, okay. So I popped my harness and popped the net, climbed out of the car. And there was like the chassis and the cab and the engine missing a fender, and there wasn't a corner on the car. There was one wheel on it, and the rear end's in the turn, in the middle of the front stretch. And I'm like, okay, I get it. But my crew chief at the time thought I was dead. Absolutely thought I was a dead person. And you'd understand, I've got a video of it somewhere that's on VHS, but the funny thing is, I got out of there. They go, my guy Greg, who I was running the car, and said, "So are you done?" I said, "No. Put the car back together. We're gonna kick ass with it next week." And we did. We won our race. I got my first Bud Pole award with that car. I got my first win with that car. And the second day I'm out. And but then my crew chief I gathered at that second race with someone who was on their team, a guy named Bob Johns, who's the best ever. He used to work with Brendan Gaughan after I was gone. No pun intended there. But he moved up. I did not. He said, you need some training. And he sent me to Buck Baker School. And I learned a lot at Buck Baker School because I actually learned in 4 days actually how to do this stuff because I really didn't know what I was doing. And so, but all you had to do was pay I think it was $250 for the truck license or $300 for the truck license, your medical, fill out the form and get a car. And that was it. It's not that way anymore, but that's as simple as it was. You could get everything but a cup license that way.
Now, this car that you rolled and 8 times or 12 times, and you said, you actually were lucid enough while rolling to remember what you're reading in this autobiography about keep it on the rev limiter.
Yeah, and I was talking this to another racer, and I think that's kind of when I remember telling my crew chief this story. He's like, "You're the real deal. That you're not Jeff Gordon, but you're a real racer." I go, "Why?" Because normal people can't do this, and their brains don't work that fast, and they don't think goofball stuff like, "Wow, it looks like the in-car camera at ESPN in the middle of it," and they're not watching their gauges at this point, and that's when I was like, he's like, "You just don't know what you're doing, but you've got the brain for this." And
were you in an arrive and drive car in this wreck?
Oh yeah.
So what happens there?
I wrote a giant check. We ended up buying cars later.
You didn't get the damage waiver?
There's no damage waiver. There's damage waivers $500. After you go over $500, it's all on you. And I wanted to put that number 6 truck back together, and so we did. I've actually got the roof to that truck in my shed. It has traveled with me everywhere I've moved because we cut the bent. I mean, the roof was bent like a pretzel. It was totally bent in, but I've kept that roof forever that my guy cut off. I said, "I want the roof." He said, "We need to cut the roof off." I said, "I want that." And that's been like this curio that has traveled with me ever since. Because we took that next race, that same race car, and I won a Bud Pole Award and won a race with it the week afterwards.
Can you, Andy, get me that footage digitally somehow, or loan me the tape and I'll give it back?
Find it. I'd have to find it. It's on a VHS tape. It's not on I've looked for it on the internet. The guy that made this Alan guy that made those videos is long gone. He's passed away. And, this is like 96 or 7, and nobody's digitized this stuff.
No, I'm just saying, if you have the tape, you can do it or give it to me. I'll do it.
If I can find the VHS tapes wherever they are, I think I still have them, but I'm not sure. I will definitely send it to you.
I'll get it done and give it back.
Yeah. If I can. I mean, again, it's like, I have no idea where that stuff is.
If you bump into it, in the next couple weeks, either you get it digitized or give it to me.
He slow motions it.
Oh, I'd love to have this while you're talking. Imagine
and it was just hysterical. Because it was such a spectacle. Because everybody thought I was dead. Because I look at the tape. My wife looked at it once and she's like, "Oh my God, I'm never watching your race." And that is the most horrible thing I've ever seen. And I just wanted to punch Dave's lights out, cause he hit me, but he wasn't, he just made an error. His car slipped up. I mean, it was a racing thing, but at the time I was hot. But no, it's interesting. It's like, that's the time though I found out that I could do stuff. I was okay. I was like, cause it didn't scare me. I just wanted to go back and do it again. And the average civilian would be like, "Yeah, that was my racing experience."
You're a Michiganer.
It was interesting, but no. So yeah, so it was fun to do it, and and we were when we were running Weston trucks and Southwest Tour, we were the openers for all the Cup guys and Busch guys, and so I got to know some of those guys and hang out with them, and it was pre-2000, and I got out in 2002. It was still, you could hang out. And you have barbecue. There would be like Fluidyne did a barbecue at California Speedway, and all the drivers would hang out at barbecue and eat steaks and ribs and BS all night. And Dale Earnhardt Jr. and I used to hang out and talk about music and stuff because we're the only two people in the paddock area that like the same music because they all listen to country, and we're like, no, we don't like that stuff. And it was just the community around NASCAR was so tight then. It was very much the old school with younger people involved in it too. And it was so welcoming to me, which was just, I felt a part of the deal almost immediately.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was really neat. There was a great community. And I sadly think that from at least the paddock area is pretty much gone these days, which is kind of sad. But it's a big business now. And it's different.
Yes. Now, speaking of NASCAR, and I'm so glad to hear Dale doesn't like country music. I mean, that helps.
Oh, he likes Brooks and Dunn and stuff, but I mean, he doesn't he likes Metallica and stuff. I mean,
no, that helps. I mean, that's hurt me in being able to watch. I mean, I remember someone trading in a car on a country station, and I gave him $10,000 less on his appraisal, and he says, what's with the number? And I said, something's wrong with your car. What is it? Well, it's got this music playing that I'm sure, we could probably replace the stereo head. So, one of my guests and a good friend is a guy named Brett Ramker. He's a NASCAR, IMSA, WeatherTech, Michelin video guy. And so he's been all over the world videoing this stuff. And he made a film at Audrain called, my brain, I lost my brain. What the hell? Hang on.
Film at Audrain.
Oh my God. No, the subtitle is The Making of a Concorde. Oh, sorry. He made a film at Audrain called The Best in Class, The Making of a Concorde Elegance, about the Audrain show. And so, I mean, he filled me in on so many, and he's one of our, if you want to watch or listen to any of ours.
Yeah.
He did a show and he talks about it. Very, 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 well, you were in the race, so it's probably less mysterious to you, but very interesting to me. And so I got to ask you a very, very serious question. Who would win, Cole Trickle or Ricky Bobby?
Oh, Cole Trickle. That's hard. Both funny racing movies. In fact, I got a NASCAR fine because we kept on quoting Days of Thunder on the radio. And he goes, there's so much nonsense. I'm going to drop the hammer. No, you're not, And, but we would talk on the radio during TV races and repeat the lines when we were just messing around. And NASCAR didn't like it, and we got fined. But no, if Ricky Bobby had a kilo of cocaine taped to the bottom of his car, he would win. But otherwise, I think Cole Trickle would win. What's interesting is that Tom Cruise actually raced some too with PL. And so though Ricky Bobby, the actor, is actually a car guy too. So it's interesting.
Will Ferrell?
Yeah, Will's a car guy. He likes cars. He's got a problem with Sunbeam Tigers. And he's tall, so I don't know that he fits in a Sunbeam Tiger, but I think he might have just bought a Sunbeam Tiger at Barrett-Jackson a couple weeks ago.
Definitely doesn't look like a Sunbeam Tiger guy.
No, he doesn't, but he likes the Shelby V8 Roadster thing going on. I think he's going to be pleasantly unsurprised that he doesn't fit in that car. But no, I think that Cole Trickle will probably win.
Okay.
Ricky was a knucklehead.
Do you know George Wallace? George was the founder of St. Michael's Concours.
Okay.
Just curious. And I go back with George when I was running the Rolls and Bentley store. He was general manager of Rolls-Royce when he was an executive at BMW and then was employee
I do know. I've met him. I don't know him. He wouldn't know me from Adam, but I've met him. Yes. I met him with Bob Austin.
Okay.
Who was in PR then.
George is just a doll of a guy. And he was employee number one with Rolls-Royce.
Interesting.
And put all that together when BMW bought the company. And we talked about that. So, okay. I was curious about that. You might want to look at that Audrain. It's on Vimeo, like a pay-per-view or rent it. I'm sorry. Rent it. Best in Class Making of a Concorde Elegance. I hope you like it, but it doesn't quite start with Dawn Patrol, but it goes into the stories of really the cars bringing families together and people together. And I think well done.
Gotcha.
Motorcycles.
Yep.
I think you have a little motorcycle background, and I appreciate all the time you're giving me, Andy.
Yeah, no worries. I love them. I'm a huge bike fan. I've had them since I've owned them myself since I was 19. Triumphs, BMWs, BSAs, had a Brough SS80, Brough Superior SS80, Guzzis, Ducatis, Nortons. I've had 6 Norton Commandos. I am not buying another one. I've sworn off forever, finally. I built the best one on the planet, and it wouldn't start one day, and I said, I'm out. This is when everyone around me in the Orton community said that's the best restored Commando we've ever seen, and it didn't start. I'm like, I'm done.
But that's how you know it was authentic. It was a proper restoration.
Yes.
You're tall for motorcycles.
Oh, you can tell by the bikes I own too, right now I've got a BMW R1200 GS. I've got a Ducati Multistrada 1100S. I've got a 73 BMW R75/5, and I've got a 02 Triumph Bonneville. So they're all taller bikes. And I've had stuff as wacky as a Desmo Sedici Ducati and things like that, and I don't fit on those.
Well, I think when you turn, your knee would drag on the ground at 10 degrees.
Pretty much. Yeah, exactly.
So at least you could make the move.
Yep. So good. Yeah, I love them. They're just that. To me, they're like flying on it. It's like it always feels like flying a World War I fighter plane or something, or World War II fighter plane. It's like, I love that you gear up to ride, and it's just, the sound is great. Everything I've got. Probably the most subdued thing I own is the BMW GS, but even it's got an acrophobic titanium system on it, so it sounds pretty decent. It was March. I'd gotten back from Amelia. We went to Chowder. That week at Chowder, they announced that New York, with National Guard, was shutting down part of New York because of COVID. And we went, holy crap. And went home. I got a friend of mine, I got him out of town because we need to get out of town. Yeah, and so we were all at home. It was 2 weeks into it, 3 weeks into it. And I knew that this wasn't going away. And people go, oh, well, we'll be going Monterey. I said, Monterey's canceled. I know it's canceled. And I didn't say anything because I have so many friends who are stakeholders. I didn't want to be bad news. I'm like, this is not going to happen. So I'm like, yeah, there goes a year. I was talking to some friends of mine in the hobby, and they're like, well, yeah, this isn't going to be a year. One of them is a doctor. He's like, yeah, Pebble Beach is a pipe dream. And I went, okay. So I was looking at Facebook one day, and my friend Vu Nguyen, who's the PCA, chairman of the PCA, executive director of the PCA, I think is his real title. And he put up this little video he put up called Cars and Coffee on the Carpet. And it was little die-cast cars, and he put them on his carpet, and he made a video. And I said, oh, this is really funny. And I have some. I had like probably 10. So I put them all out. And I said, hey, I got one too. He's like, that's so cool. And I was thinking about it. And this is like, I know what it is. It's March 28th of last year. I'm thinking, what if you had a concours for toy cars judged by Concours judges? Because the Concours judges, like, name one of the big Concours, Paul Russell, Ken Gross, anybody, right? Bill Warner. They're not doing anything, just like me, because they're in the same boat as I am, so everybody's free. And so I called up Boo, and I said, so I'm going to steal your idea and do something with it. He goes, what are you doing? I said, you're not stealing it. It's your own idea. You just took it to the next level. I said, great. You cool with that? He goes, yeah. I go, okay. So I called, who'd I call? I called Bill Warner, but he wasn't my first call. I called Michael Furman, the photographer, up. I said, hey, so if I made a die-cast car concours where you're judged on Facebook for model cars, would you do it? He said, would you be a judge? He goes, oh, that sounds totally fun. So he said yes. Then I called Tommy Kendall, who's a pal. I said, hey, so got this crazy idea, and since none of us are doing anything, would you judge this thing? He goes, oh, that'd be great. So he said yes. And then I called Paul Russell up from Paul Russell and Company. I said, so if I did, he said yes. And so I called Warner up, and I said, hey, Bill, so I've got this harebrained idea for this concours of toy cars for concours. Do it online and people judge it. And, people like you. He's like, that's a great idea. That's the craziest idea I've ever heard. And it's a great idea. And Bill Scheffler, who founded Fairfield Concours, told me the same thing. He goes, that's a crazy idea and it's brilliant. And I went, okay. I go, well, I don't know what to call it. And I was thinking I'd call it Concorde Carpet. He goes, yeah, but I get where you're going with that. But it's that, but what if you call it something different? I said, okay. So we were brainstorming. He goes, how about Isolation Island Concorde? And that was the name. I said, that's the perfect name. And so we launched it on April Fool's Day of 2000, very appropriately. And we put it out there. I had one sponsor from my insurance agency, Haydenwood Insurance. And the other sponsor I had was Motorology, who does many different car things. Video presentations. They do the back end with what we're using right now, the tools you're using right now, for people like Keith Martin's podcast and things like that. So he also does T-shirts and hats and artwork and all that. It's a wonder. Motorology is a great site. And they were our other sponsor because my friend Matt is a friend and a client, and he agreed to help. So he created my logos. We made little awards about this big for each car that were scaled to the size of the car, that were custom made for each owner in each car. And so we launched this thing. We said, okay, what's going to happen? And I said, hey, donate to a charitable organization affected by this situation that you choose. I don't care who it is, but give a donation and give like $5 or $1, whatever you can. If you can't afford anything, you don't have to give anything, but if you can, give $1 to $5 to a charity. And we put it out there on Facebook. And I messaged about 100 of my Facebook following friends saying this was there. And that's the extent of the marketing we did. And in the first round, we had 285 entrants. And I went, huh. And so I made McKeel Haggerty my head judge. He did it the whole time. It was fantastic. And he gave me a lot of his time, and his time is very valuable. And he was just terrific. We had a blast doing it. And Bill was one of my board of advisors. Bill McKeel and Bill Warner, Bill Scheffler, and McKeel were on my board of advisors. They were kind of people that helped me steer the thing because they'd all run Concorde, done things like this, and so they were very, very useful. And just terribly gave me a lot of time. So we did this thing, and we gave out awards, and we did it. The first time we did it, we just did the text on Facebook because we did it on Facebook because Facebook was the only place. I played on the internet in business before, and I knew that the only way to do this after talking to a lot of friends rapidly was to do it on Facebook. If I wanted to execute immediately and get it and be first out of the gate with something around this deal in our hobby space that we could all do, Facebook was the only solution that was a cost-effective that I could actually do because I could just build a ding page and figure it out. And so we did that. And we had all these entrants, and they all won, and people all cheered, and we got all these followers. There's like 3,000, 4,000 followers on the thing still. And then we did it again, and I didn't have any sponsor. No one was. My insurance agency was sponsoring the awards, and that was it. But we didn't have any. We had other costs, we had mailing costs and all this stuff. And so I had like Tom Plazinski from BMW and Eric Keller from Enthusiast Auto Group, which was like the greatest place to buy a BMW M car. He has the best ones on the planet. They were my BMW judges. So I said, Tom, does BMW want to sponsor this crazy thing? And he goes, yeah. And I went, great. And so then I called Rob Moran at Mercedes, who was one of my judges. I said, Rob, does Mercedes want to sponsor this thing? And they said, yeah. And I called Ray Schaefer. I said, would Porsche want to sponsor Isolation Island? He goes, I think so. And so he hooked me up with the club thing, and they sponsored it too. I'm like, and I talked to Haggerty, and they're like, well, finally, after 2 rounds, you finally ask us. And I said, it just didn't occur to me that it would go more than 2 rounds, because we were doing it like every 2 weeks. We did 1 round, 2 weeks, another round. I was like, wow. And so what we did, we first learned it was 60 hours a week of work. My friend Dirk de Jager, who was my co-founder, who I brought in to do my initial photography and to help out with it, we kind of ran it together. I ran the head of it, but he filled in my gaps all over the place. And when we needed example photography for class 3, he'd shoot his diecast collection in his studio for the presentation because we didn't have any, because no one had done it, right? So we didn't have any template photography to use for examples. And so he's a brilliant car shooter. And so he shot these amazing photographs of his collection that looked like real cars. So we did this thing and we got sponsors. And so people kept on donating, and we started getting people that had won Pebble multiple times as entrants, many of them. And people know. So you get like the John Shirleys and people involved, right? Literally, you're just dropping names. They are in it. Peter Gleason, who has a very exceptional collection of race cars and BMWs primarily in Seattle. Another tremendously nice guy and got to be great friends. But, I think we had 6 Pebble Beach winners, best of show winners entering their toy cars in our concours. And really going after it. And, but what it did is it gave these people something fun to do, and people made friends that had never met. And we made a $350 price cap on the cars. And so what it let it do is that you couldn't just buy an amalgam model for $10,000 and win, because it wasn't legal. And we had a couple people try to enter stuff that wasn't legal. One of them is a very big collector, and I sent him packing, and he never came back. I'm like, that's fine. I asked Bill about it. I said, well, he's a big deal. And Bill's like, you're the king. It's your show. What you say goes. And I said, that's very much thanks for doing, but we're not doing this. And he probably, I know I'm going to run into it this year, and I'm going to get some heat from it, but I'm okay. He's not a client. So we did this thing, and people made friends. The entries got better and better, and you were looking to page, so you saw some of the quality of these entries, right? And they got really good really fast. And what's great is the pictures are great and they're beautiful, but the stories these people told about these cars and these toy cars, like this guy. Here's my perfect example. This is my favorite all-time ever diecast car and favorite LMP race car ever. It's the V12 LMP art car. And it says, protect me from what I want. Lack of charisma can be fatal. The unattainable is invariably attractive. You are so complex, you don't respond to danger. It's got all this great stuff on it. I've loved this car since BMW did it. It's got all these funny sayings on it. Protect me from what I want is the best one, even though it never worked for me. So the stories of why people love these things, it's often like, my dad had a Reliant Scimitar, and I remember growing up on it, and this is the same color as his, and this is the story of our time with this real car, and how I bought this car to connect with it. Or I watched the 1967 Sebring race, and this car won, and I recreated the scene of 1967 Sebring that I got to watch when I was 3 years old. And just these extraordinary editorial tales of passion and love for the hobby came across. And what's interesting is I was on a panel with Sandra Button and a number of others from other concours about the impact of online concours. And they said the one thing that was lacking from theirs was the community aspect. People didn't get to talk and share and get to be pals. Ours did. Because we put the darn thing on Facebook, comments happened. And people would have dialogues, and they'd get to know each other, and they'd share other stories. And wow, I had this too, and here's my story. And like we put people together globally around the world who had never met, who are now fast friends. So we had that walking around Pebble and meeting people experience virtually, and nobody else pulled it off because they all built websites. And we only used Facebook because it was the only solution. We didn't want to. I mean, I know what good web design is. That was not good web design.
It was quick and cheap.
You betcha. And we had a budget of my credit card, right? So it was coming out of my pocket. But we also raised over $100,000 for charities, which blew my mind.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, it was just, and again, we've tried, our whole idea is none of my friends in any part of the hobby were having any fun in March, April, May, June, July, August, because we weren't going anyplace. And I just wanted to make fun for everybody. And people had fun. I mean, when I went back to the 6th and 7th round to Ralph Gilles from Mopar, who is the head of Mopar, he's not even the head of design, he's like the big cheese now, and he'd still show up to judge with enthusiasm. That's huge. Or Bobby Rahal, who was a judge, or David Hobbs, who was a judge, or Bill Warner, who was starting to prepare for his own 2021 Concours. They always gave us the time. And it was just because they saw what we did, I think. We got nominated for an Octane Award last year. Octane Magazine does an award for, and we didn't win it, But we got just getting nominated. We made the short list with Pebble Beach's virtual concours with the one that they did at Peterson. With the Peters, we were in the same league with Peterson virtual concours. So I felt like we did pretty well by just showing up and being mentioned.
So something that nobody knows about you, something they'd be surprised to know about.
Oh, okay. So, my dad, when I was a kid, had a very different job. And how old are you?
55.
Okay, so, and you probably experienced this. So, my dad had a carnival in Michigan. So, I was raised a carnival kid. I was a carny.
You're a carny.
Yeah, even though I never worked on a carnival or anything. Oh, except I did have one job in the carnival. I had to sell balloons one year, and it was like the worst. It marks to this day the worst job I've ever had. Dressed as a clown is my mom's idea. Terrible. I was like 6. I'm like, who does that to a 6-year-old? In a clown outfit with a nose. And but no, I was raised on, and the thing is, we had it till I was about 11. And I got to really see what that business, it was interesting. You see all kinds of people when your parents own a carnival.
Did your dad travel the country setting it up or just regional?
Michigan, Georgia, sometimes for the Georgia State Fair, Florida for a couple gigs, but all over Michigan. Detroit State Fair from 1967 till 1975. So you went.
Yep. Yep.
You remember the old cash register they had out there, the big old iron cash register at the state fairgrounds? Yeah, they had the little gondola rides you rode around. Yeah.
The Sky Ride.
Yep. Yeah, so that was our fair for years, the state fair. But yeah, I don't know. It's not like I don't talk about it. It's just like it never comes up, right? So it's a weird thing.
I got a scoop finally.
Yeah,
Jeff Stearns
totally.
Connected Through Cars show on Andy Reid. He grew up in a carnival family.
Yeah, and I knew how the games are rigged. I knew how to beat the rig at the games. I knew all kinds. I learned all kinds of information you're just never going to use anywhere else ever.
We should have another show about why you can't get the ring on the Coke bottle and why you can't, whatever.
Because it's rigged. It's dumb luck. Everything's positioned exactly where it's positioned to be positioned that way, so it's hard to do. So
that's beautiful. And what would you like us to know about you? What do you wish people knew about you?
I have a huge music problem. I often wish I would have been a music producer because I have friends that like music, but I have one friend, my friend Justin Abbott, my friend Trent Abbott works for Haggerty. His brother Justin is a car collector, and he's the only person I know, and my friend John Nikas is into music and loves music, but Justin is he's the only friend of mine in the hot car hobby that's this way. He and my friend Nick Smith, who used to work for Bonhams and now runs a company called Classic Avenue. Shout out to Classic Avenue. Hey, Nick. But he started Bonhams motorcycle auctions, but he's a British expat. But he was a record producer too, so this is why. We're the 3 guys we know of in the car hobby that if the right song's on the radio, even if we're late to where we're going in the car, you wait till the song's done. You don't turn it off. It's a crime against nature. And sometimes music you can listen to and talk through it, but more times than not, shut up, music's on. So if we're in the car and conversing, the radio doesn't go on. Otherwise, we won't do it. I love music. The only thing I get I worked in Hollywood for 6-7 years, and I never got starry-eyed over Hollywood. It was my work. But I still get goofball-y, and I get some really good access to events and things just because of other people and friends in the car hobby. I still get goofy over rock stars. I'm like, wow, you're my hero. I went to see the about 2 years ago before COVID, and got backstage and the whole thing through my friend James Eller, and who's their bass player. And I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. You're one of my favorite bands on the planet. I'm like a 10-year-old, I'm like a 13-year-old girl in 1987. I swear to God, going, ah! And it just...
You never crossed the line to groupie, though.
No, not at all. But I mean, I just music just does something else to me. It takes me someplace else.
Tell me a song that when you're in the car and you're late and it's a crime against nature, a crime against humanity if you leave the car before the song's over. What song defines that for you?
Oh my God, there's lots. There's one by the Smiths called "How Soon Is Now." If "How Soon Is Now" by the Smiths is on the radio, it cannot be turned off. And my wife goes crazy. I'm like, no. And we'll be going to the supermarket and I'll hear it'll be halfway through. I said, stop it, no. And I'll sit in the car. She'll be unloading groceries, mad at me because I'm listening to the rest of the song, which I have in like 3 different formats at home: vinyl and CD and everything else. And another one is one of my all-time favorite bands, Love and Rockets, which is a offshoot of Bauhaus, which is the original goth band. Daniel Ass, David J, and Kevin Haskins band. Have this song called "The 7th Dream of Teenage Heaven," which is the title track to their first album in '88, which I saw on tour in '88. There's something about that song that's like the spookiest, scariest, most extraordinary piece of music I've ever heard, and it doesn't go off, and you don't talk. Like Nick and I were in a car, and somebody was with us, and they came on, and I said, like this, and they said, whoa, and Nick turned around and goes, mate, just shut up. Because he gets it too. And but it's just the music takes me someplace else. It evokes feelings more than normal people. And it's weird. I don't know why. My parents could care less. They like show tunes, and my mom is horribly addicted to Neil Diamond, which I just cannot, which I find unlistenable. And
but the Seventh Dream. Yeah, you're saying if it comes on the radio.
Yeah.
But is this what station? What this isn't. When do you hear this on
XM?
Okay.
80 First Wave. Sometimes it's on Alternative Nation. It's often on First Wave does Dark Wave on Sunday nights, which all this more gothy, deeper, sketchier stuff. Third music is Walking. The first song is Walking on the Moon by the Police. There was something I have a memory of when I first heard that song, what I was doing, who I was with, and it brings me back there immediately. Every smell, sight, feeling is there, and it's just perfect. And I also play bass, so all those things have a bass component too. And but that is just like, I love music. I love music like a musician loves music, I think. A friend of mine's, a couple of my friends of mine are professional bass players, and they're like, "Oh, you've got it. You're like that dorky guy. You're like us, but you just aren't a professional." I said, if I could swap careers, give up cars, and work in the music industry, we'd be completely okay.
Got it. So
and never mess with this stuff ever again.
My taste is different, but I'm writing down your taste. I'm going to listen to the. But to me, like if American Woman comes on,
okay, yeah, it's a great song. You don't turn the goddamn radio off, right?
That's one that you right
or Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. You cannot turn it off. It's illegal, and it's like 11 minutes long. So get ready to wait.
Radar Love.
Radar Love. Yep. Led Zeppelin's Rain Song Live from Song Remains the Same is just brilliant, and the studio track sucks. But the live track on Song Remains the Same is so good. And Jimmy Page was never better in any other song ever. But yeah, those are verboten. You don't turn them off the radio. A lot of Bowie, like so much Bowie, Heroes, Fame, Heroes especially. That's another song that is like of my sacred songs that I just love.
So it's Andy Reid in music. Who knew?
Yeah, I love it. Again, I junk all these books and then give them to some museum, and I'd work in the music industry like this. Though I don't know if I want to do it now because it's very different. But I think I could have been behind a soundboard and done some good stuff. I've played with a little bit with friends who are musicians, and I've got the knack for it. What is that? Who's that to?
My dad.
So your dad worked in the business.
He was with Capital, and he actually got the job. My uncle in West Bloomfield worked for Decca, and Capital, and he applied with Capital, and Capital called the house, and my dad answered in Oak Park, and said like his brother's not there, but he'll take the job. Like something like he took my uncle's job, his brother's job, when they were trying to recruit him at Capital. Now my dad, so he gets this this album called Meet the Beatles that he
we all know what album that is. Yeah,
good job promoting. Although he said that they weren't the greatest when he was listening to the auditions and stuff. They weren't his favorite. But he ended up going in the car business when my ma was pregnant with me because somebody pulled up in a new or almost new Eldorado convertible, and my dad said, "How did you buy that?" And he said, "I opened a car lot." So he opened a car lot, dropped everything, and opened a car lot on Livernois, and then later in Royal Oak. You have been a doll, Andy Reid, making all this time. We've been together. Time flew for me. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
It was really fun. Thanks. I haven't done this in a while, so this is great.
Well, you haven't done this ever.
This has been Jeff Stearns, Connected Through Cars.